Welcome back to the deep dive. Sometimes you find yourself stuck, right, in a situation where you know there's a better way for everyone, but somehow you all end up making choices that lead somewhere worse.
Yeah, those strategic traps, they're everywhere.
Exactly. So today, we're tackling that head on. We're going deep into game theory, but not the, dusty academic stuff. This is about practical tools, how to actually transform those situations.
We're aiming to help you become what we might call a game changer.
I like that. A game changer.
Because the fundamental insight here, and it's crucial, is that the game you're in, business, projects, even family stuff, it's not fixed. You can always change it, gain an edge.
So we're using game theory as a toolkit for transformation.
Precisely. And our main focus, our kind of case study for this toolkit, is the prisoner's dilemma.
The classic.
The classic.
Yeah.
Because game theory actually gives us multiple ways out of it, a whole set of different moves you can make.
It sounds like a big shift from traditional thinking.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Yeah.
Raymond W. Smith, former chair of Bell Atlantic, he talked about this, said adopting this game theory mindset led them to do things, joint ventures, mergers, stuff that was just unheard of in a traditional planning environment, as he put it.
Wow. So it demands a different kind of manager then.
Totally. He said managers need to be flexible, intellectually rigorous, and highly tolerant of ambiguity. And that intellectual rigor, that's what we're calling game awareness. That's the goal today.
Okay, game awareness. Let's unpack that. Seeing the strategic world clearly, understanding players have will, they react, and not just blindly applying theories.
Exactly. Because elegant theories can be dangerous if you ignore their assumptions. The source material gives us a couple of really stark warnings about this.
Right, the cautionary tales. Where do we start?
Let's start with Sir Isaac Newton. Giant intellect, right? Gravity, calculus.
Doesn't get much bigger.
You'd think he could handle the stock market. But in 1720, the South Sea bubble, he jumped in.
And got burned. Badly.
Lost a fortune. 20,000 pounds, which was like unbelievable money back then. And his famous quote afterwards, he couldn't calculate the madness of people.
The madness of people, that says it all.
It really does. His physics worked for planets because planets don't react. They don't see you coming and change course. But markets are people. People with will. They anticipate, they react, they get swept up in bubbles. Newton applied the wrong model.
He treated a social game like a physics problem. That distinction is key: inanimate objects versus reactive players.
Precisely. And the second example is much more recent and maybe even scarier. The 1998 collapse of long-term capital management, LTCM.
Yes, LTCM.
Yeah.
Stacked with Nobel laureates, right? Super sophisticated investors.
Absolutely. And they relied heavily on the Black-Scholes formula for options pricing. Brilliant math, won a Nobel Prize. It helped them spot tiny mispricings in the market.
So they made bets based on this mathematical certainty.
Huge bets, massively leveraged bets, like 25 to 1 sometimes. They figured the math was solid.
But here's where the game awareness comes in, or rather the lack of it. What did the formula assume?
Well, two critical things LTCM's own actions undermined. First, it assumes the market is kind of stable. Volatility follows historical patterns. Second, and this is the killer, it assumes the traders themselves are too small to affect the price, like they're invisible, non-reactive.
But LTCM wasn't small. They were enormous.
Exactly. And crucially, lots of other big players were using the exact same formulas. So when LTCM made these giant leverage bets, they weren't invisible at all. They were the market, in a way.
So when one bet went bad,
and they needed to sell to cover their losses, everyone else using the same model saw the same warning signs. They all had similar positions because the formula told them to.
a synchronized rush for the exit.
Precisely. Instant liquidity crisis. Nobody could sell without crashing the price further. The mathematical certainty evaporated because the model didn't account for the players' reactions. It nearly took down the global financial system.
Wow. So the lesson here for us, for you listening, is pretty clear.
Yeah. Mathematical models are powerful, but dangerous if you ignore their built-in assumptions, especially the assumption that players won't react strategically or that conditions won't change. Game awareness adds that essential dose of reality.
Okay, let's ground this in the core problem we keep mentioning. The prisoner's dilemma. The PD. Even if you've heard it, it's worth quickly recapping because it just perfectly captures that tension between what's best for me versus what's best for us.
Right. The classic setup: two suspects arrested for a minor crime, maybe 5 years jail time. Cops suspect them of something worse, say 20 years. They're interrogated separately.
And the deal is offered.
Confess, implicate your partner. If they stay quiet, you walk free 0 years. They get the full 20.
Okay.
If you both stay quiet, you both get the minor charge, 5 years each. Not bad.
Sounds like the best mutual outcome.
It is. But
Yeah.
if you both confess, you both get, say, 10 years.
So confessing seems risky if the other person stays quiet, but good if they confess too. How does it play out?
It plays out based on the dominant strategy. That's the move that's best for you, no matter what the other person does.
Oh, okay. So what's the dominant strategy here?
Think about it from one prisoner's view. If my partner stays silent, should I confess or stay silent? Confessing gets me 0 years instead of 5. Better to confess.
Right.
Now, what if my partner confesses? Should I confess or stay silent? Staying silent gets me 20 years. Confessing gets me 10. Again, better to confess.
So no matter what the other person does, confessing is always the better individual move.
Exactly. That's the dominant strategy. And since it's the dominant strategy for both prisoners, rationally, they both confess.
And they both end up with 10 years, which is worse for both of them than the 5 years they'd get if they both stayed silent.
Precisely. That's the paradox. The third best outcome arises because individual rational self-interest prevents them from reaching the second best cooperative outcome.
And that's why it's studied so much, because it shows how individual incentives can clash with the collective good.
Absolutely. It's the engine behind price wars in business. Everyone cuts prices hoping to gain share, but they all end up making less profit. It's behind arms races, environmental issues. Even basic economic transactions can have this structure.
It sounds kind of depressing, like we're doomed to these suboptimal outcomes.
But here's the good news. Game theory doesn't just diagnose the problem, it offers solutions. We've identified, based on the source material, 5 distinct escape routes from this dilemma.
5 ways out. Okay, I'm listening.
We're talking regulation, cartelization, retaliation, trust, and relationships. Plus, an overarching strategic approach, commitment. And that's where we'll start building our Game Changers toolkit.
Okay, chapter 1, commit. This sounds active, like taking control.
It is. Commitment means deliberately restricting your own future options or influencing the choices of others to change the game's dynamics before it fully plays out. You limit your flexibility now to gain an advantage later.
Like,
sometimes literally. Think about the historical examples. Tariq ibn Ziyad, AD 711, lands in Iberia, burns his ships, tells his troops, victory or death. There's no going back. That's commitment.
total commitment forces the issue.
Then there's Hernan Cortés, 1519, facing the Aztecs. Similar idea, but with a twist. He didn't burn all his ships near Veracruz. He scuttled most, but left one.
Why leave one? Doesn't that undermine the commitment?
That's the genius. If he sunk them all, it's pure force holding his men hostage. By leaving one ship, he created immense social pressure. Imagine the shame, the stigma of being one of the few who chose to sail back to Cuba on that single remaining boat.
So it wasn't just physical commitment, it was psychological. Committing his men through honor and peer pressure.
Exactly. The source says he committed his men, not himself in the same way. Very clever strategic manipulation.
We do this on a smaller scale too, right? Trying to commit our future selves, like setting a really early alarm.
Definitely. Economists talk about the dual self, the impulsive part that wants the donut now, and the rational part that wants to be healthy long-term. Commitment devices help the rational self win.
Was hiding the cookies.
Or even physical acts. There's a neat study mentioned about chocolate. People did 15 minutes of brisk walking, then took a break. They ate way less chocolate, like 15 grams, compared to people who just sat quietly contemplating, who ate almost double, nearly 29 grams.
So the exercise itself acted as a commitment. It changed their craving.
Seems like it. The physical act suppressed the immediate desire, binding the future self.
Okay, so commitment is powerful. But the timing matters, right? You can't commit after the fact.
Absolutely crucial. A commitment only works if it's made early enough and visibly enough to actually influence the other player's decision. It often forces you to move first strategically.
Which brings us neatly to timing itself. Game theory focus 1, the timing of moves. It's not just about when things happen chronologically.
Not at all. It's about information. Who knows what, when. We can break timing down into 3 types.
Okay, what's the first?
Simultaneous moves. This means players choose their actions in mutual ignorance. They don't know what the other is doing when they make their own choice. The actual clock time doesn't matter as much as the information void.
Like rock, paper, scissors. You both choose at the same time without knowing the other's move.
Perfect example. Or think military strategy. The Battle of the Bismarck Sea, 1943. The Japanese needed to move a convoy, north or south route. The Allies needed to decide where to send reconnaissance planes.
So who moved first?
Chronologically, the Allies probably sent planes out first. But the Japanese, back in Rabaul planning their route, couldn't see where the Allied planes were. So strategically, their decisions were made in mutual ignorance. It was a simultaneous game.
Gotcha. Okay, type 2.
Sequential moves. This is more like chess. One player moves, the other observes, then responds. Crucially, though, the second mover cannot pre-commit to their response. They just react based on what they see.
So they play their best move given the new situation.
Exactly. Think about the 2008 U.S. vice presidential race. Obama picked Biden first. McCain saw that move. Then he picked Palin. His choice wasn't based on some pre-announced threat or promise. It was his best calculation at that moment to maximize his chances, given that Biden was now on the board.
Makes sense. And the third type, this sounds like the powerful one.
Commitment moves. This is where it gets really interesting for game changers. Like sequential moves, the second mover observes and responds. But they can credibly commit ahead of time to how they will respond. This allows the first mover to potentially lock the second mover into a specific course of action.
So the second mover ties their own hands in advance.
Effectively, yes.
Oh.
To influence the first mover's choice. We'll see examples of this later.
Now, we often think moving first is automatically better. The early bird gets the worm. Is that always true in strategy?
Definitely not, especially in business. Think about Kodak with cameras, P&G with Pampers, Xerox with copiers. They weren't the absolute first movers in their markets, but they often came in, learned from the pioneers' mistakes, did it better, and ended up dominating.
Right, the second mover advantage, learning from others' failures.
Apple and the personal computer is the classic case study here. MI's Altair came out about 18 months earlier, hailed as the next big thing, but it was, frankly, a bit of a mess, sold unassembled, hard to use.
So Apple waited, watched,
and learned. They launched the Apple I, pre-assembled, user-friendly. They capitalized on the Altair's flaws. Being strategically late was actually a huge advantage because they had better information.
But sometimes moving first is critical, like for stopping someone from entering your turf.
Yes, especially in deterrence. Let's look at the Xbox entering the console market against Sony's PlayStation 2. Sony would have loved to scare Microsoft off.
How could they have done that?
The obvious threat would be, if you launch Xbox, we will unleash an absolutely brutal, all-out price war that will destroy profitability for everyone.
Sounds scary. Why didn't that work?
Because the threat wasn't credible. Think about it. Once Microsoft had actually launched the Xbox, would it really be in Sony's rational self-interest to start a massive price war that would instantly kill their own PS2 profits?
Probably not. The damage is already done, in a way. The benefit of punishing Microsoft then seems vague. Maybe helps in the next console generation years later.
Exactly. The immediate pain for Sony would be huge, the future benefit uncertain. Because Sony couldn't credibly commit to that self-destructive price war after entry, the threat wasn't believable before entry. They couldn't strategically move first with a credible deterrent, so they had to accept Microsoft's entry. Timing and credibility are linked.
Okay, so we've covered commitment and timing. Let's move to the next part of the toolkit, changing the structure and rules. Chapter 2 is about inviting regulation. This sounds counterintuitive for, say, businesses. Why would you invite rules?
Well, because sometimes the rules can save you from yourselves. Regulation, broadly speaking, government rules, NCAA rules, even company policies is our second escape route from the prisoner's dilemma. It works by changing the options available, or, more often, the payoffs associated with certain choices.
Steering behavior away from that mutually harmful outcome.
Precisely. Look at early American college football. It was incredibly violent. Tactics like the flying wedge, pioneered by Harvard around 1892, were causing serious injuries, even deaths.
A prisoner's dilemma of violence.
Absolutely. Each team felt they had to use brutal tactics like the wedge if the other team might. Not using it against an opponent who did use it meant certain defeat. Best outcome for one team. Use it when the other doesn't. Worst outcome for everyone. Both use it, leading to mayhem.
But the dominant strategy was still use the wedge.
Tragically, yes. Until President Teddy Roosevelt stepped in around 1905. He basically forced the colleges to clean up their act, leading to the formation of the NCAA.
And the NCAA made new rules.
Stricter rules. Outlawing the most dangerous tactics, adding penalties. By changing the payoffs, making the wedge lead to penalties, not just potential victory, they changed the dominant strategy. Suddenly, not using the wedge became the rational choice. Regulation fixed the broken incentive structure.
Okay, so an external regulator steps in. But you said firms might invite regulation.
Yes, the 1970 cigarette advertising ban is the absolute prime example. Tobacco companies were locked in a massive advertising arms race.
Another PD.
A classic advertising PD. If firm A advertised heavily and firm B didn't, firm A gained market share. But if both advertised heavily, the ads just canceled each other out. Market share stayed roughly the same, but both firms were spending fortunes on ads. They were worse off than if neither advertised.
So why didn't they just stop advertising?
Couldn't coordinate. The dominant strategy was still advertise. If you stopped unilaterally, you'd instantly lose market share. Plus, get this, the FC had a rule back then, the Fairness Doctrine, that meant lots of cigarette advertising triggered free airtime for anti-smoking messages.
Wow. So they were literally paying to fund the campaign against themselves.
Through their own competitive struggle. It was costing them a fortune. So what did the industry do?
They asked the government to ban TV and radio ads.
Bingo. They proposed the ban. They kept the warning label requirement. Seemed like they were cooperating with public health efforts.
Yeah.
But strategically, the ban solved their massive PD. It forced all firms simultaneously out of the costly both advertise box into the much more profitable neither advertise box.
Their profits went up after the ad ban.
Soared. They eliminated a huge expense without fundamentally changing the competitive balance. The government, aiming for public health, inadvertently handed the industry a massive profit boost.
That seems cynical, or at least a huge miss by the regulators.
It was a stunning failure of game awareness by the regulators. They didn't grasp that the anti-smoking campaign was essentially being subsidized by the industry's own internal conflict.
What could they have done differently?
If they'd understood the game, they could have perhaps insisted on matching anti-smoking ads in print media or other channels not covered by the broadcast ban. Keep the pressure on, using the industry's own money, instead of just letting them off the hook financially.
Fascinating. Okay, regulation isn't always about restriction, though. It can create positive incentives, too.
Yes, look at the ND Amendment eliminating neglected diseases, passed in 2007. The goal was to get big pharma interested in developing drugs for diseases like, say, snail fever, which primarily affect poor populations and don't offer big market returns.
How do you incentivize that?
With a brilliant piece of strategic design, a priority review voucher. If a company develops and gets FDA approval for a drug targeting one of these neglected diseases, they get this voucher.
And what does the voucher do?
It lets them jump the queue for FDA review on any other drug they develop later. Maybe their next potential blockbuster cancer drug.
And getting a blockbuster drug to market months earlier is worth
hundreds of millions of dollars, easily. So the voucher itself becomes incredibly valuable.
a market-based solution to a humanitarian problem. Did it work?
Well, the rollout had a hiccup. The very first voucher went to Novartis for a drug, Cortum, that was actually developed way back in 1996. It just hadn't gone through the US FDA process before. So huge reward, but arguably no new R&D stimulated in that specific instance.
A bit of a loophole.
A bit.
Sure.
But the potential is there. And the source suggests it is now attracting serious interest from companies like nanovirucides. It's turning a for-profit focus towards problems that were previously only tackled by nonprofits, using self-interest for the greater good, structured by regulation.
This idea of companies and regulators adapting leads us to the next game theory focus, strategic evolution. It's not just about finding an equilibrium, but how the game itself changes over time.
Exactly. The strategic landscape is almost never static. Players constantly adapt to what others are doing. Strategic evolution is this tendency for strategies within an ecosystem to shift towards whatever is currently the best response to everyone else's strategies.
Creating a kind of arms race.
Often, yes. Think about the whole college admissions craziness in the U.S. It involves students, colleges, and third parties like the College Board, SATs, APs, and crucially, the U.S. News and World Report rankings.
Ah, the rankings. They changed everything.
They really did. Once U.S. News started heavily weighting things like average SAT scores, the evolutionary cycle kicked in. Colleges needed higher scores to climb the rankings.
So they started emphasizing SATs more in admissions.
Which pushed students and parents to maximize those scores, test prep, tutors costing, $300 an hour.
Feeding back into the colleges, valuing scores even more.
Right. Then you see the explosion in advanced placement AP courses. Students started loading up on APs to signal academic rigor.
Another way to stand out.
Until so many students had tons of APs with top scores that this signal got diluted. So what did top colleges do? They adapted again, started requiring higher scores, like a 5 instead of a 4, for credit, or even declaring some AP subjects just Not worthy of college credit anymore.
Wow. So it's constant adaptation, never really settling down.
Exactly. It's not in equilibrium. And the potential downside, critics argue, is that this whole system pushes students towards strategic box ticking, taking lots of APs, rather than fostering genuine intellectual exploration. The game shapes the player's behavior.
This isn't just a human thing, is it? This evolutionary dynamic.
Not at all. Biology offers amazing examples. Ecologists Sinervo and Lively studied side-blotched lizards in California. The males have 3 distinct genetically based mating strategies.
Okay, what are they?
You've got the orange throats, big aggressive guys who take over large territories with multiple females. Then the blue throats,
Right.
smaller, they guard just one mate very closely. And finally, the yellow throats. They actually mimic female appearance and behavior to sneak into territories and steal matings.
Orange beats blue, blue beats yellow, yellow beats orange, like rock, paper, scissors.
Precisely. It's a biological rock, paper, scissors game. If orange bullies are common, the sneaky yellows do well because the oranges can't guard everything. If yellow sneaks are common, the vigilant blue guards do well because they can spot the imposters. If blue guards are common, the aggressive oranges can overpower their small territories.
So the population mix shouldn't be stable.
Exactly what the ecologists predicted using game theory formulas. They calculated it wouldn't settle, but would constantly orbit around the theoretical evolutionary stable strategy, ESS. The dominant strategy would cycle every few years.
And did the actual lizard populations do that?
Observations matched the prediction beautifully. The proportions of orange, blue, and yellow males cycled, just as the game theory model suggested.
That's incredible. It really drives home the point.
It does. Games shape the players. Until you develop that game awareness, the source material puts it starkly. Most people are essentially puppets dancing on a string held by the laws of game theory. Becoming aware lets you start pulling the strings yourself.
Okay, let's move to Toolkit Part 3, Collaboration and Competition. Chapter 3 talks about merging, or more provocatively, colluding cartelization as a way out of the PD.
Right. This is our third escape route. If competition is a prisoner's dilemma where firms undercut each other into oblivion, then merging or forming a cartel is a way to coordinate and move everyone to a more profitable, cooperative outcome.
Stopping the mutually destructive behavior.
Exactly. Think about the early barbed wire industry in the U.S., late 1800s. Initially, hyper-competitive, like 150 companies at one point. Eventually, it boiled down to the big 4, but they were still tearing each other apart on price. Cartels and mergers were a direct response to that price war PD.
A more famous and maybe controversial example would be De Beers and Diamonds.
Oh, absolutely. For nearly a century, De Beers ran the diamond market through its diamond syndicate. They were incredibly open about it, basically saying their goal was to break the commandments of Mr. Sherman, the Sherman Antitrust Act, by controlling supply and managing prices globally.
That sounds like a classic cartel. How did they justify it?
This is where it gets fascinating strategically. Their implicit argument was almost consumer-focused in a twisted way. They argued that what people buy when they buy a diamond, especially for an engagement, isn't just the stone, it's the promise of forever. The promise that the diamond's value, its symbolic meaning, will endure because the price will never collapse.
And only a cartel could guarantee that price stability. A free market couldn't.
That was the claim. A competitive market would lead to price fluctuations, undermining the very symbolism De Beers had spent decades building. So the cartel wasn't just for profit. It was supposedly preserving the meaning of the product.
But that control is slipping now, isn't it?
Significantly. Since around 2000, their market share has dropped dramatically from maybe 65% down to around 43% by 2005 and likely lower now. And losing that cartel grip, that introduces real danger.
Danger how? Cheaper diamonds.
Not just cheaper, volatile. If prices start to dip and people lose faith in that forever store of value, it could trigger a vicious cycle. Falling prices erode confidence, which reduces demand, which pushes prices down further. The whole symbolic structure could unravel.
Wow, the PD threat returning as the cartel weakens. This dynamic isn't just in luxury goods, though. The source mentions charities.
Yes, it's a really interesting application. Reputable charities find themselves in a fundraising PD. They worry that using aggressive telemarketing firms, the kind that, in some cited cases like Infocision, kept maybe 78% of the money raised, will alienate donors.
Makes sense. People hate those calls, especially if they find out most of the money isn't going to the cause.
Right. But here's the trap. If Charity A doesn't use these aggressive tactics, but Charity B does, Charity B might raise more money in the short term and gain market share among donors. So even though they hate it, The dominant strategy for many charities becomes use the aggressive telemarketer.
Leading to situations where telemarketers use scripts, apparently approved by the charities, claiming maybe 75% of every dollar goes directly to serving people, when the charity's net amount was actually closer to 22%.
Exactly. A collectively damaging outcome driven by individual competitive pressure.
So what's the game theory solution proposed here? More regulation.
Actually, a specific kind of deregulation, or rather an exemption. The idea is to grant charities a new antitrust exemption, specifically for coordinating their fundraising activities.
Like farmers' cooperatives. You mentioned the Capper-Volstead Act earlier.
Precisely like that. Allow reputable charities to band together, run their own large-scale, efficient fundraising campaigns, share costs, and set standards. This would let them bypass the expensive, often deceptive, for-profit middlemen and escape the fundraising PD trap.
Allowing them to keep more of the money for their actual work.
Interesting. Now, understanding how these outcomes happened, why collusion works, why deterrence fails, sometimes requires us to understand different equilibrium concepts. This is our third game theory focus. The right concept depends entirely on the timing we discussed earlier.
Okay, so different types of equilibrium for different types of games. What's the first?
The most famous is the Nash equilibrium, named after John Nash, of course. This applies specifically to simultaneous games where players choose in mutual ignorance.
Right, like rock, paper, scissors or the Battle of the Bismarck Sea.
Exactly. A Nash equilibrium is an outcome where, given what everyone else is doing, no single player can improve their own result by unilaterally changing their strategy. Everyone is doing the best they can, given the choices of others.
It's a point of stability, but maybe not the best possible outcome, like in the PD.
Often not. Let's revisit that capacity entry game. Monopolist deciding whether to build a second factory, entrant deciding whether to enter. If they choose simultaneously, the Nash equilibrium is often calculated as monopolist does not build plus entrant builds. Because if the monopolist doesn't build, the entrant's best move is to enter, assuming there's profit. And if the entrant does enter, the monopolist's best move, in this simple simultaneous model, might be to not build and just accommodate them, rather than start a costly capacity war after the fact.
But you said earlier that seems unrealistic sometimes.
It often is, because it ignores timing and the ability to move faster. Which brings us to the second concept, rollback equilibrium.
Okay, this sounds like it applies to sequential games.
Exactly. Where players move one after another and the later movers can see what happened before. Rollback works by thinking backward from the end of the game.
Like in chess, thinking several moves ahead.
Precisely. You figure out the best move in the very last stage, then knowing that, figure out the best move in the second to last stage, and so on, back to the beginning. Crucially, this assumes the last mover cannot pre-commit. They just play their best response at the time.
So back to the capacity entry game. If it's sequential, say the monopolist can build faster.
Now, rollback applies. The entrant thinks, if I enter, what will the monopolist do? Knowing the monopolist can build fast, the entrant anticipates the monopolist will build the second factory to fight them. Since entering leads to a capacity war, the entrant's best move at the start is to stay out.
And the monopolist knows this.
The monopolist, rolling back the game, realizes that building the factory credibly deters the entrant. So the monopolist will choose to build. The rollback equilibrium becomes monopolist builds plus entrant does not build. The first mover advantage, if speed allows it, changes the outcome completely from the Nash prediction.
Okay, Nash for simultaneous, rollback for sequential without commitment. What's the third?
The commitment equilibrium. This is where a player can credibly commit in advance to a response, even if that response might seem irrational later. This is the most powerful tool for actively changing the game.
So the monopolist wants the entrant to stay out, but doesn't really want to build the second factory if they don't have to.
Exactly. Their dream outcome is monopolist does not build plus entrant stays out. How can they achieve this using commitment?
They threaten to build.
Yes, but it has to be a credible threat. They say, look, entrant, if you dare to enter my market, I commit to building that second factory and starting a price war, even though it will hurt my own profits badly in the short term.
But we already established that once the entrant is in, building might be irrational for the monopolist. So why would the entrant believe the threat?
That's the million-dollar question. Credibility is everything. The monopolist has to make the threat believable before the entrant moves.
How?
Several ways. They could tie it to something bigger, like their personal reputation or honor. We always fight entrants, no matter the cost. Or they could link it to future games. If we let you in, everyone will try.
Yeah.
Or, very cleverly, they can change their internal incentives.
Like how?
Imagine the monopolist company changes its CEO's bonus structure. Instead of being based on profit, it's now based purely on maintaining market share.
Ah, so if the entrant comes in and takes market share, the CEO is now personally incentivized to build that factory and fight back aggressively, regardless of the short-term profit hit, just to protect their bonus.
Precisely. By changing the internal rules, they've made the externally visible threat completely credible. They've committed themselves by removing their own future choice. That's the power of commitment equilibrium.
All right, moving into the final phase of the toolkit, sustaining cooperation. This seems crucial after escaping the initial PD. Chapter 4 talks about enabling retaliation. This sounds aggressive.
It can be, but it's often the bedrock of stability. Retaliation, or the credible threat of it, is our fourth escape route. It changes the PD by making the cost of betrayal immediate and severe, forcing cooperation, or at least non-aggression.
Like a standoff.
The Mexican standoff is the perfect image. Think Jesse James and Billy the Kid, guns drawn. Each one's dominant strategy, purely for survival, might be to shoot first. But if they both know the other is fast enough to shoot back before they fall, the likely outcome is mutual destruction.
So the best outcome becomes neither shoots.
Exactly. The PD, shoot versus don't shoot, gets stabilized because the immediate, certain retaliation makes defection, shooting first, suicidal. The threat creates a tense peace.
And the ultimate example of this was the Cold War, mutually assured destruction, MAD.
The textbook case. Nuclear peace rested entirely on the shared belief that any first strike would inevitably trigger a devastating retaliatory second strike from the other side. Total annihilation was the guaranteed outcome of aggression.
A terrifying balance. But the Force points out it relies on some shaky assumptions.
Very shaky hidden assumptions, not mathematical but psychological and political. 1, sanity. Both sides have to actually prefer not being annihilated. 2, capability. Both sides need a survivable second strike force. 3, incentive. And this is the trickiest one. Both sides must be willing to actually push the button and retaliate even after they've already been hit catastrophically.
That third one.
Yeah.
The willingness to retaliate after you've already lost. That seems questionable sometimes.
Hugely questionable. And the source gives a chilling scenario where MAD could break down because of doubt about that incentive. Imagine a hardline U.S. president is leaving office. A known conciliator is coming in.
Okay.
The Soviets, in the Cold War context, might calculate, quote, "This new leader talks peace. If we hit them now, maybe they won't retaliate. Maybe they'll see it as the ultimate folly to strike back when they've already been devastated."
So the perceived lack of incentive in the incoming leader makes the outgoing hardliner nervous.
Exactly. The outgoing hardliner might think, they doubt our resolve under the new guy. They might hit us during the transition. Maybe we should hit them first, while we still can guarantee retaliation. And the adversary, seeing the transition, might also be tempted to strike first, believing retaliation is less likely. The doubt about the will to retaliate destabilizes the whole system.
Scary stuff. Okay, bringing it down from nuclear war. Retaliation works in business too. Airline pricing.
Absolutely. Dynamic pricing is often stabilized by retaliation. Airlines face a PD. Best for them individually might be to undercut competitors slightly to fill seats, but if everyone does it, fares plummet.
So why don't fares always plummet?
Because prices are posted and monitored constantly through systems like ATPCO. If American Airlines cuts fares on the Dallas-Chicago route, United sees it instantly and can match it within minutes.
So any benefit from cutting is temporary.
Vanishes almost immediately. The certainty of immediate matching of retaliation removes the incentive to cut in the first place. It allows airlines to maintain higher fares, almost as if they were colluding, purely through the dynamic threat of punishment. It turns a one-shot PD into a continuous game where cooperation, high prices, is enforced by retaliation.
This reliance on credible threats, whether through retaliation or commitment, highlights the need for the other side to believe you. Which leads us perfectly into Chapter 5. Build trust.
Trust is our fifth escape route. And it's fascinating because while we think of it morally, game theory shows it's also a highly rational, even profitable strategy, especially in a world where you can't always rely on enforcement.
Even among potentially selfish players.
Even then, we know, sadly, that not everyone is trustworthy. Estimates suggest maybe 1–4% of people might have sociopathic traits, maybe higher in criminal circles. Yet even in those environments, deals need to happen.
How? If you can't trust the other person.
Consider the Coke deal game scenario from the source. Buyer wants cocaine, seller has it. Buyer wants the drugs without paying, seller wants the money without delivering. What are their dominant strategies?
Buyer's best move, don't pay. Seller's best move, don't deliver.
Right. The Nash equilibrium is no deal. Another prisoner's dilemma. Trade can't happen if those players are purely opportunistic and untrustworthy.
So how does the deal ever happen?
The PD can be escaped if just one side is demonstrably trustworthy. Imagine a seller with a strong reputation for always delivering. They can credibly promise, "Give me the money first, you know I always deliver."
If the buyer believes that promise,
Then the buyer's calculation changes. Paying now leads to getting the drugs. Not paying leads to nothing. The buyer chooses to pay, and the cooperative outcome, the deal, is achieved. Trust, even one-sided trust based on reputation, enables transactions that would otherwise fail.
so building a reputation for integrity isn't just nice, it's strategically valuable.
Hugely valuable. It allows you to make credible promises and threats. Credibility rests on two things: being able to observe and respond, like a last mover, and having the other player believe your stated response. The simplest path to that belief, as the source says, conduct yourself at all times with the utmost integrity.
What if direct trust is hard to establish between two parties?
That's where trusted third parties come in to make money. They bridge the information gap, the asymmetry of information.
Like escrow services. Or certified pre-owned cars.
CPO cars are a perfect example. Buying a used high-performance car, say a Porsche or an Aston Martin, involves a lot of uncertainty for the buyer. Was it driven hard? Maintained properly? The seller knows, the buyer does it.
Big information asymmetry.
Right. So when the manufacturer, Mercedes, Porsche, etc., steps in and certifies the car after rigorous checks, that certification acts as a trusted third-party signal. It reduces the buyer's uncertainty.
Allowing the dealer to charge more for the CPO car.
Exactly. That price premium, maybe $800, $1,300 according to the source, reflects the value of the reduced uncertainty. The manufacturer builds a reputation for reliable certification, which also incentivizes dealers and previous owners to maintain cars better in the first place. Trust greases the wheels of the market.
This even applies at home, right? The daddy's dessert dilemma.
Yes, a charming but accurate PD. Parent wants kids to eat veggies, high priority, but prefers not to serve sugary dessert, lower priority. Kids want dessert, high priority, and prefer not to eat veggies, lower priority.
Dominant strategies.
Parents is don't serve dessert, regardless of veggie eating, avoids sugar. Kids is don't eat veggies, regardless of dessert promise, avoids yucky food. Result, no veggies eaten, no dessert served. Suboptimal for both parent, no veggies, and kids, no dessert.
The PD strikes again. How does trust solve it?
The parent needs to overcome their own dominant strategy and make a credible promise. If and only if you eat your veggies, I absolutely promise I will serve dessert.
Changing the kid's calculation.
Right. Now, eating veggies leads to dessert. Not eating veggies leads to no dessert. If the kids trust the parent's promise based on past experience, the parent's honor, then eating veggies becomes their dominant strategy. The whole thing hinges on the credibility born of trust. Break that trust once, and cooperation collapses.
Okay, that leads us to the final escape route. Chapter 6. Leverage relationships. This feels connected to trust and retaliation.
It absolutely is. The prospect of repeated interaction of a future relationship is perhaps the most powerful force sustaining cooperation between self-interested players. It's our sixth tool.
How does that work in practice?
There was a great undercover study mentioned involving mechanics in New Haven. They took the same car needing a standard inspection to different mechanics.
And told them different stories.
Exactly. Some customers said they were just passing through, leaving town for good. Others said they lived locally and would be back. The price difference was significant.
How much?
Customers claiming to leave town paid almost $60 on average. Customers claiming they'd return paid only about $38.
Wow. So the mechanics were ripping off the tourists.
Not necessarily maliciously ripping off, it reflects the economic value of the future relationship. The mechanic is willing to offer a lower price, maybe even a loss leader, on the first inspection to the local customer, hoping to earn their repeat business over the long term. That future profit stream is lost with the leaving town customer, so they charge the standard rate. The relationship changes the pricing game.
But just repeating the game isn't always enough, right? If two people are stuck defecting in a PD, they could just keep defecting forever.
True. Constant mutual defection is also an equilibrium in a repeated game. If I know you'll always cheat, my best response is to always cheat too. Cooperation needs a mechanism to get started and to recover from inevitable slip-ups.
Which brings us to tit for tat.
The famous tit for tat. TFT strategy. Political scientist Robert Axelrod ran computer tournaments in the 80s, pitting different strategies against each other in a repeated prisoner's dilemma. And the simplest strategy, TFT, consistently came out on top.
What exactly does tit for tat do?
It's beautifully simple, based on reciprocity and forgiveness. It has 3 key features.
Okay.
1, it's quick to trust. TFT starts by cooperating in the very first round. It takes a small risk, assuming the potential long-term gains from cooperation outweigh the short-term risk of being betrayed once.
Nice, but potentially naive. What if the other player defects?
That's feature 2. TFT is quick to punish. If the other player defects, TFT immediately desects in the very next round. Instant retaliation. This sends a clear signal. Defection will not be tolerated.
Okay, so it's nice, but not a pushover. What happens after the punishment?
Feature 3. TFT is quick to forgive. As soon as the other player returns to cooperation, TFT immediately forgives and cooperates in the following round. It doesn't hold grudges.
Why is not holding a grudge important?
Because the goal is mutual cooperation for long-term benefit. Getting stuck in cycles of mutual punishment is self-defeating. TFT's punishment is just a tool to bring the other player back into line. Once they comply, cooperation resumes immediately.
So, trust, punish, forgive. Simple but powerful.
Incredibly effective in fostering cooperation over time, which leads to the source's idea of the twin pillars of cooperation. What really makes cooperation stable in the long run?
What are the 2 pillars?
Pillar 1 is an intrinsic desire to cooperate. This comes from shared values, honor, ethics, maybe empathy. It's a secure foundation because it doesn't depend on calculations or time horizons.
And pillar 2?
Pillar 2 is the power to punish others. This relies on consequences, retaliation, enforcement. This pillar only works if players believe the relationship, and thus the threat of punishment, will continue for a long time. If the game is about to end, the incentive to cheat increases because future punishment doesn't matter.
You can see both pillars at play in something like the Mafia, right?
A dark but perfect example. The Cosa Nostra historically relied heavily on both. They had oaths, codes of silence, or omerta, appeals to honor, that's the intrinsic desire pillar. And they had the brutal, undeniable threat of murder for betrayal, the power to punish pillar.
So how did law enforcement break them down?
They had to dismantle the second pillar first. The Witness Protection Program removed the certainty of punishment for informants. Once the threat of retaliation was weakened, they could then wait for the first pillar, the intrinsic code of honor, to crumble under pressure, leading to key figures like Valachi and Gravano turning state's evidence. You need to undermine both pillars to truly break down that kind of enforced cooperation.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. We've unpacked the prisoner's dilemma and explored this fantastic Game Changers toolkit, 6 distinct strategies.
Right. We've moved beyond just playing the game as you find it, to actively shaping it.
Let's quickly recap those 6 tools, the ways to escape the PD.
First, commitment binding yourself or influencing others early, like Cortez scuttling his ships.
Second, regulation, changing the rules and payoffs externally, like the NCAA or maybe more strategically, the cigarette ad ban.
Third, cartelization or collusion, coordinating with competitors to avoid mutual destruction, like De Beers attempted.
Fourth, retaliation, using the credible threat of punishment to enforce cooperation, like nuclear MAD or airline pricing dynamics.
Fifth, trust building credibility through reputation and integrity to enable cooperation. Think CPO cars or even the Coke deal paradox.
And sixth, relationships, leveraging the value of future interactions to incentivize cooperation today, like the mechanics discount or the success of tit for tat.
It's a powerful set of conceptual tools. And the key takeaway for you listening is that you face these strategic choices, these potential PDs, every single day, often without realizing it.
At work, in negotiations, even at home.
Everywhere. Mastering this isn't just about winning more often in the games you stumble into. It's about seeing the hidden strategic opportunities, the chances that change the game itself in ways others don't even perceive.
Becoming that game changer.
Exactly.
Now, to leave everyone with something really provocative to think about, we talked about that commitment equilibrium. The idea that you can sometimes achieve your best outcome by credibly threatening to do something that seems irrational or even self-destructive.
Right. Committing to an action that hurts you, but hurts the other player more, or prevents them from taking an action you dislike.
So the final thought for you to mull over is this. What's the key strategic dilemma you're facing right now? In your job, your business, your life?
And then ask yourself, is there a seemingly irrational, uncomfortable, maybe even self-sabotaging move you could credibly commit to, publicly or structurally, right now?
Something like burning a bridge to motivate a team, or tying your own hands on a negotiation point, or committing to an inconvenient metric.
Could that kind of commitment, that visible tying of your own hands, actually transform the entire strategic situation to your advantage by forcing the other players to recalculate? The most powerful moves often lie just beyond the edge of conventional rationality. Think about it.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're looking beyond just, winning a specific game or solving one problem. We're talking about building something deeper.
Yeah, it's about cultivating what we call game awareness, really seeing the strategic layer of the world around us.
Right. And Raymond W. Smith, the former chairman of Bell Atlantic,
Yeah.
he really hit the nail on the head.
What did he say?
He said that this game theory approach leads to strategic moves that would have been totally unheard of in a typical planning scenario.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Because the real power here, and this is kind of the theme for our whole deep dive today, is realizing that the game can always be changed.
Exactly. We're not just stuck playing by the rules we're given.
Nope. We're learning how to actively reshape the whole strategic landscape. It's about becoming an architect of the game, not just a player.
So our mission today is pretty ambitious. We're calling it the Game Changer Files.
Sounds intriguing.
We're diving into 6 really different, really pressing real-world problems. And in each one, the core issue is kind of hidden. It's buried in weird incentives or timing problems or these big gaps in what people know.
Okay, 6 files. What kind of ground are we covering?
It's incredibly broad. We start with keeping online prices fair and competitive. That's file 1.
The price comparison sites. Always wondered about those.
Then we look at the absolute tragedy of the Newfoundland cod collapse in file 2, a huge regulatory failure.
Oof, yeah. A classic sad example.
File 3 tackles the messed up incentives in real estate, why your agent might not always be pushing for the highest price.
Okay, I can see the conflict there.
Then we shift gears. File 4 is about helping out emergency room doctors dealing with drug seekers.
That sounds intense
Yeah.
and complex.
It is. File 5 looks at rebuilding trust online, specifically platforms like eBay. How do you stop fraud and extortion?
Trust online, yeah, that's a perennial problem.
And finally, File 6, maybe the biggest game of all, fighting global antibiotic resistance, the superbugs.
Wow. Okay, so from online shopping to superbugs, that's quite a range.
Definitely. For each file, we're going to pinpoint the strategic heart of the problem, what's really going on, and then brainstorm ways to fix it by actually changing the game itself.
Not just playing better, but changing the rules. Got it.
Let's jump in. File 1, the tricky world of online pricing and price comparison sites.
Okay, so when these price comparison sites first came out, everyone thought, great, this is fantastic for consumers. Maximum competition, lowest prices.
And there was solid evidence for that, right? I remember seeing a study.
Yeah, there was a really compelling one back in the 90s. It looked at online shopping for life insurance.
Right, life insurance. What did it find?
For the policies you could easily compare online, prices dropped significantly, like 8 to 15%.
Wow, that's substantial.
It really was. It translated to at least $115 million saved per year just for U.S. consumers back then. So that transparency, it seemed like a huge win.
It seemed like it worked just like the economists predicted. More information equals better prices.
It did, initially. But here's the twist, the strategic dark side. Game theory shows us that sometimes too much transparency, especially instant transparency, can actually backfire.
Backfire how?
It can become a tool for sellers to coordinate their prices without ever actually talking to each other. It can dampen real competition and, end up hurting consumers.
Okay, so perfect information isn't always perfect for the market. How does that work? How does transparency help them collude implicitly?
Let's look at the airlines. There's a classic strategic setup called the airline discount game.
Okay.
It's basically a prisoner's dilemma, but with multiple players.
So everyone's tempted to cheat, meaning cut prices.
Exactly. Each airline thinks if I cut my fares, I'll steal customers from the others. That's their dominant strategy if they think short-term or competitively.
Makes sense.
But if everyone cuts fares, they all end up in this low-price, low-profit nightmare. They'd actually all be better off if they could somehow agree to keep prices high.
But they can't legally collude, right? So how do they escape that low price trap?
Well, they found a way partly through this system called ATPCO.
ATPCO, what's that?
It stands for Airline Tariff Publishing Company. And crucially, it was jointly owned by the major airlines.
Oh, okay. Bit of a tell right there.
Maybe. But what it did was provide public, immediate fare data. Before systems like this, an airline might try to sneak in a discount for a few days, hoping rivals wouldn't notice right away.
But with ATPCO,
Retaliation was instant. And that threat of instant retaliation is the key to implicit collusion. It changes the whole game dynamic.
can you give an example of how that worked in practice?
Sure. The source material details this really neat strategic dance back in 1989. It was between American Airlines and Delta over fares between Dallas and Chicago.
Okay, well, yep.
Delta started a widespread discount. American matched it, which you'd expect. But they did something clever.
What was that?
They attached these footnotes to their newly matched fares. It was like a signal. They basically said, okay, we'll match your discount this time, but we want to go back to just limited discounts.
Right. How did they signal that with footnotes?
They linked their willingness to keep matching Delta's broad discount to a threat. They added a retaliatory discount on one of Delta's most profitable routes, Dallas to Atlanta, also using matching footnotes.
Wow. So it was like saying, play nice on Dallas-Chicago, or we hurt you on Dallas-Atlanta.
Precisely. It was public communication without picking up the phone. I see your move, I'll match it, but if you don't back down, I'm prepared to escalate where it hurts you most.
And that threat, knowing your competitor can and will hit back immediately?
That changes everything. Your dominant strategy flips. Instead of discount, it becomes keep prices high, because you know any attempt to undercut will be instantly punished, making everyone worse off.
So they escape the prisoner's dilemma, but the consumers lose out on lower fares.
Exactly. And this isn't just ancient airline history. Think about modern price comparison sites like pricegrabber.com.
Yeah. They're not owned by the retailers, though.
Doesn't matter. They can still facilitate the same coordination. Check the prices for something popular, like a Canon camera kit. It's kind of startling how often you see, say, 3 out of the 4 featured retailers offering the exact same price. $499, $499, $499.
So they're not colluding explicitly, but the site makes it so easy to see and match instantly.
That it leads to the same outcome. The site becomes the coordination device. The speed is the problem.
Okay, so if instantaneous matching is the strategic problem, how do you change the game on a site like PriceGrabber to actually promote competition?
We need a game-changing solution that tackles that speed. The sources suggest a two-pronged approach.
Prong one.
Disrupt the timing. The site should change its rules. Only allow retailers to update their prices once a day, say at midnight.
Ah, so no more instant retaliation.
Exactly. If retailer A drops their price at 10 a.m., retailer B can't zap them back until the next day. That gives retailer A a whole business day, potentially, of lower prices without immediate punishment. It breaks that instant threat mechanism, which is so critical in these dynamic sequential games.
Makes sense. What's the second prong?
This one tackles the structure of who gets to play. Call it the open access principle.
Meaning?
The site has to let any retailer sign up, no matter how small, no matter how low their prices are. Don't curate based on existing relationships or price points.
Why is that important?
Because it encourages what you might call hit-and-run discounting. Small, aggressive competitors can jump in, offer a killer deal, grab a bunch of clicks and sales.
And maybe disappear or change their offer before the big, coordinated players even notice or can react effectively the next day?
Precisely. It injects that disruptive element back into the market. It forces genuine competition instead of allowing the platform to become a tool for quiet coordination.
That failure in pricing coordination, where transparency backfired, leads us kind of naturally to another massive strategic failure. But this one, with devastating ecological consequences, the collapse of the cod stocks off Newfoundland.
Yeah, this is File 2. It's a really painful example of the prisoner's dilemma playing out in the real world, specifically the variant known as the tragedy of the commons.
We're talking about a fishery that was historically almost unbelievably abundant, right? Like the sea was just teeming with cod.
Absolutely. For centuries, the big game-changer event, the thing that really shifted the underlying resource dynamics, was actually a technological innovation.
Not better boats initially.
Not just better boats, but what created the demand for them. Clarence Birdseye's invention of flash freezing back in 1924.
Ah, okay. So suddenly you could freeze fish right on the boat and ship it anywhere.
Exactly. It created this massive global demand that just wasn't there before. And that fueled the development of huge factory trawlers, ships that could just vacuum up vast quantities of fish.
And this sets up the tragedy of the commons. How does that dilemma work for the fishermen?
It's brutal.
Well,
Each individual fisherman, or fishing boat captain, is acting perfectly rationally from their own perspective.
their dominant strategy is?
Catch as much fish as you possibly can, as fast as you can. Why? Because if you don't catch that fish, the boat next to you will. The resource is shared, and there's no individual incentive to conserve it if others won't.
But when everyone follows that rational strategy,
The collective result is disaster. The fish stock collapses. Everyone is worse off in the long run. The structure of the game itself pushes them towards destroying the very resource they depend on.
it's tragic. And what's really striking is that regulations were put in place, but they failed spectacularly in the Northwest Atlantic, leading to that moratorium in 1993. Meanwhile, in Europe, they managed to stabilize similar stocks like cod and herring. What went wrong strategically with the Canadian and U.S. regulation?
The core failure was in the information they were using. The regulators relied heavily on a model called virtual population analysis, or VPA.
VPA, how did that work?
Basically, it tries to estimate the current fish population by working backward from the amount of fish the fishermen reported catching. So it looks at catch data over time and tries to reconstruct the historical population size.
Okay, that sounds reasonable on the surface, but what was the flaw?
The fatal flaw was that the model assumed the fishermen's reported catch data was accurate.
And the fishermen, caught in that same tragedy of the commons dilemma.
Had massive incentives to misreport their catches. They needed to protect their livelihoods.
How did they misreport?
Several ways. They often lied about the age of the fish they caught, maybe saying they caught more older fish to make it seem like the younger breeding populations were still healthy. And, crucially, they almost never reported the illegal practice of discarding dead, undersized fish back into the ocean. Tons of fish were being killed, but never showing up in the official data.
So the VPA model was being fed garbage data, essentially.
Exactly. And the regulators, relying on this flawed model, were, as the sources bluntly put it, blissfully unaware of their blindness. The game was fundamentally broken because the information was corrupted by the players' incentives.
And the ecological fallout wasn't just fewer cod. The whole ecosystem got thrown out of whack, right?
That's the truly scary part, the trophic cascade. It's a domino effect in the food web.
What happened?
When the cod, which were major predators, were removed, their usual prey fish like herring and capelin exploded in numbers.
Okay, more food for other things.
Not exactly. These newly abundant smaller fish then became ferocious predators themselves, specifically preying on cod eggs and the tiny young cod fry.
Wow, so the things cod used to eat started eating the baby cod.
Precisely. The whole system flipped. Even after the fishing stopped, the cod couldn't recover because their own former prey were now preventing their young from surviving. The game changed itself in a way that locked in the collapse.
That's horrifying. So if we want to change the game of fisheries management to prevent this, we need to fix the information problem and the incentive problem. How?
Well, first, you use technology to get better data, bypassing the fishermen's reports altogether.
Like what?
Ironically, the same kinds of sonar technologies that help the trawlers become so efficient at finding fish can be adapted to directly monitor the fish shoals. You get real-time, reliable data on population size and distribution, something VPA could never provide accurately.
So, better data collection. But what about the incentive for fishermen to hide things like discarding? How do you get truthful information about that?
This is where the really clever strategic fix comes in. You create a separate, monitoring-only agency.
Separate from the enforcement agency.
Completely separate. Think of it like the U.S. Census Bureau or maybe an IRS whistleblower program model. This agency's job is only to track violations like illegal discarding. But, and this is crucial, it does not share its specific findings on individual boats with the enforcement agency.
Why keep them separate? Wouldn't the enforcers want that data immediately?
They might want it, but separating them breaks the fear factor. It allows fishermen to report illegal activities, like discarding dead fish, truthfully to the monitoring agency without fearing immediate fines or prosecution based on that specific report.
So they're providing data about the real state of the fishery, even the illegal parts, without incriminating themselves directly at that moment.
Exactly. The monitoring agency gets a much more accurate picture of what's actually happening, how much discarding is occurring, where, when. Enforcement can still do surprise inspections, absolutely. But now, the monitoring agency's accurate, but anonymized or aggregated data allows the enforcement wing to target those inspections much, much more effectively.
You decouple the game of collecting honest data from the game of immediate punishment.
That's the key strategic shift. You change the incentives around reporting.
Okay, file 3 takes us into territory that's probably familiar to a lot of our listeners: selling a house. And the strategic puzzle here is the relationship with your real estate agent.
Right. On the surface, it seems like your goals are perfectly aligned. You want the highest price, The agent gets paid a commission based on the price, so they should want the highest price too.
Seems logical, but you're saying it breaks down.
It breaks down pretty quickly when you look at the actual numbers in the agent's incentives. It's a classic case of misaligned incentives hiding in plain sight.
Let's walk through it. What's the standard commission?
Typically around 6% total, but that's usually split between the agent representing the seller and the agent representing the buyer. So your seller's agent might be getting, say, 1.5% or maybe 3% if they also bring the buyer. But let's stick with 1.5% for simplicity in this scenario.
Okay, 1.5%. So on a $500,000 house, the agent's commission is $7,500.
Correct. Now let's play out a scenario. A buyer comes in and offers $490,000.
Okay, $10,000 below asking.
If the agent convinces you, the seller, to accept that $490,000 offer quickly, their 1.5% commission is $7,350.
All right.
Now, what if the agent pushes hard, holds more open houses, negotiates fiercely, spends maybe a few extra weeks, and manages to get that full $500,000 asking price?
They get the full $7,500 commission, so they made an extra $150.
Exactly. An extra $150 for potentially weeks of extra work, stress, and holding costs.
That seems like a really bad return on their time and effort.
It absolutely is. The sources estimate that just the agent's cost of continuing to represent you, their time, advertising, administrative stuff, runs around $100 per week.
So holding out for that extra $10,000 for the seller might only net the agent $150, but it could cost them more than that in time and expenses, plus the risk the deal falls through entirely.
Precisely. The agent's rational self-interest pushes them towards a quick sale, not necessarily the absolute highest price. If they push for that extra $10, they gain maybe $150, but they risk losing the entire $7,350 commission if the buyer walks or if the process drags on and they miss out on landing their next client.
Wow, that creates a strong incentive for the agent to advise accepting any offer that's reasonably close rather than fighting for every last dollar.
Definitely. And gets compounded because homeowners themselves often get anxious and measure the agent's success by how fast the house sells, not just the final price. This can further encourage agents to suggest a slightly lower initial asking price, just to guarantee a quicker sale and a happier, less stressed client.
So the whole system kind of nudges things towards speed over maximum value for the seller. How do you change that game? You need to realign the incentives.
You do. You have to remove that agent's incentive to rush the closing, just to minimize their own risk and time cost.
What's the proposed game changer for sellers' agents?
It's a pretty radical shift. Move away from percentage commission entirely and use a cost-plus contract.
Cost plus. How does that work?
Instead of a commission based on the sale price, the seller pays the agent for their documented time and actual expenses incurred representing the property. Plus, and this is key, a significant bonus only if the house sells above a pre-agreed benchmark price.
So the agent gets paid for their work, reducing their downside risk of the property sitting, but the big payday only comes if they actually exceed expectations on price.
Exactly. It dramatically reduces their financial incentive to just get it done quickly. Now their incentive is aligned with hitting that higher price target to get the bonus.
That also seems like it would change how agents handle things like staging or minor repairs.
It could, yeah. Because they're being paid for their time and managing the process, they might be more incentivized to efficiently organize those ancillary services, painting, staging, landscaping, using their contacts and scale.
Yeah.
They become more like a project manager focused on maximizing the asset's value, not just facilitating a transaction.
Okay, that addresses the seller's agent. What about the buyer's agent? Their commission is usually paid by the seller as part of that total 6%, right?
That's right. And that system hides the cost from the buyer. It feels free to them, which really stifles competition among buyers' agents. Why compete on price or service if the fee is basically fixed and paid by someone else?
So how do you change the game for buyer's agents?
You have to make the cost transparent and negotiable. The buyer's agent should be forced to negotiate their compensation directly with their client, the buyer. The person actually receiving their services should be the one paying for them, or at least negotiating the fee.
So instead of the seller paying a hidden 3% to the buyer's agent, the buyer would have to explicitly agree to pay that agent maybe $6 amount or Y%, or negotiate it down.
Yes. Suddenly the buyer is acutely aware of the cost. What does that do?
It makes them shop around, compare agents based on fees and services.
Exactly. It transforms the game from this opaque agent commission game into a fierce agent competition game. It becomes a prisoner's dilemma, but this time among the agents.
How so?
Each agent now has an incentive to offer better service, or more likely, a lower fee, to win the buyer's business. If one agent offers 2.5% instead of 3%, others will feel pressure to match or beat it.
So the dominant strategy shifts towards competing on price.
Right. It will probably lead to a shakeout in the industry, with many agents perhaps leaving the business. But for the buyers, it would unleash real competition, likely resulting in lower transaction costs and agents having to demonstrate much more value.
That's a fundamental restructuring, moving from hitting costs and inertia to transparency and active competition. Okay, let's shift settings dramatically now, from the housing market to the hospital emergency department. File 4.
All right, File 4 tackles a really tough, hidden strategic problem in healthcare. The sources point out something surprising. For many emergency physicians, the biggest source of job stress isn't necessarily the trauma cases or the high-pressure resuscitations.
What is it then?
It's the constant, draining barrage of patients who are there primarily seeking narcotic pain medication, the drug seekers.
Wow. Is that really that common?
It's a huge issue. We're talking over 1 million ED visits every single year in the U.S. that are linked specifically to prescription drug misuse or abuse. It's a major driver of the overcrowding crisis we hear so much about.
Okay, so what are the strategic factors driving this? Why is the ED such a target, and why is it so hard to manage?
There are two main strategic failures at play here, according to the analysis. First is asymmetric information.
We've seen that before. One side knows more than the other.
Right. The patient knows for sure whether their pain is real or if they're exaggerating or faking it to get opioids. The doctor, however, doesn't know for sure. They can suspect, but they can't be certain.
And because of liability and ethics,
They often feel forced to err on the side of caution. They might prescribe pain medication, even if they're highly suspicious, just to avoid missing a genuine case or facing a complaint or lawsuit. That information gap creates an easy pathway for people misusing drugs.
okay, that's the information problem. What's the second strategic failure?
This one is about perverse incentives, specifically those created by the hospital administration's focus on patient satisfaction scores.
You mean those surveys they send out after a visit, like Press Ganey?
Exactly. Press Ganey scores are a huge deal in hospitals. Physicians are constantly rated on them, and often those ratings are directly tied to their pay, their bonuses, sometimes even their job security.
I can see where this is going.
It creates this really damaging, misplaced incentive. If a doctor suspects a patient is drug-seeking and denies them narcotics, what happens to the satisfaction score the patient gives?
It tanks. They're angry they didn't get what they came for.
Right. So the system unintentionally pushes doctors towards writing those opioid prescriptions, even when their medical judgment screams otherwise, simply to protect their satisfaction scores and, by extension, their income or job. Customer satisfaction gets prioritized over appropriate medical care.
That's deeply problematic. And it doesn't just affect the doctor-patient interaction, right? This focus on satisfaction can actually boomerang back and hurt the hospital itself.
Absolutely. It creates a significant hidden cost and liability for the institution. It's not just about the ethics, it's a major legal and financial risk.
How so?
Well, think about it. If a hospital is found to be systematically pressuring its medical staff, even implicitly, to prioritize satisfaction scores over sound medical judgment, and this leads to patterns of inappropriate care, like overprescribing opioids.
That sounds like grounds for lawsuits.
Big time. Whistleblower lawsuits, for one, but also it opens the door for government auditors, specifically entities called RAC auditors.
RAC auditors, what do they do?
RAC stands for Recovery Audit Contractors. They're basically bounty hunters hired by Medicare. Their job is to sniff out improper Medicare payments, anything from simple billing errors to, crucially, payments for medically unnecessary treatments.
And inappropriate opioid prescriptions driven by satisfaction scores would count as unnecessary.
You bet they would. If RAC auditors can demonstrate a pattern of a hospital providing inappropriate care driven by these satisfaction incentives, they can demand massive clawbacks of past Medicare payments. Suddenly, prioritizing those scores turns into a huge financial liability.
Okay, so the whole system is strategically flawed. How do you change this game? It seems like the incentives are the core problem.
They are. So the first, most immediate game-changing fix is blunt. Hospitals need to completely eliminate all financial penalties and incentives tied to those Press Ganey satisfaction scores, at least as they relate to physician compensation and review. Full stop.
Just decouple pay and job security from those potentially manipulated scores.
Yes. Free the physicians to make decisions based on medical appropriateness, not on chasing a star rating from potentially manipulative patients.
That seems crucial. But is there a deeper fix? Something to make the ED less attractive to drug seekers in the first place?
Yes. Beyond fixing the incentive structure, The goal is to encourage a systemic shift, what the sources call unleashing a race to toughness.
A race to toughness. That sounds harsh.
It's not about denying legitimate pain relief. It's about making the ED a much less hospitable, much higher risk, lower reward environment for those specifically seeking drugs inappropriately.
How do you do that? What are the tools?
A key tool is the effective use of prescription drug monitoring programs, or PDMPs.
Right, the state databases that track opioid prescriptions.
Exactly. When these are well integrated into the ED workflow, a doctor can, in seconds, check a patient's recent controlled substance history. If someone got a week's worth of Vicodin from another ED just 2 days ago, the information asymmetry collapses. The doctor now knows something is fishy.
So better information closes that gap.
Right. Combine that better information from PDMPs with the removal of the perverse satisfaction score incentives, and the strategic landscape of the ED changes.
How does it change behaviorally?
Drug seekers are strategic too. They learn which EDs are easy targets and which ones are tough, meaning they check the PDMP, they don't cave to pressure, they offer non-narcotic alternatives first. They'll start avoiding the tougher EDs.
And that frees up the doctors and nurses.
Exactly. It allows the emergency department staff to focus their limited time and resources on actual emergencies, on treating acute illness and injury, on saving lives, which is what they're there for.
Yeah.
It's a strategic evolution that prioritizes good medical care over a distorted notion of customer service.
Okay, let's move from the high-stakes environment of the ED to the seemingly more mundane but still strategically complex world of online marketplaces. File 5. Rebuilding trust on platforms like eBay.
Yeah, it might seem mundane, but the sources frame a basic eBay transaction as a really fundamental strategic challenge. It's another variation of the prisoner's dilemma, actually.
That's so. It's just buying and selling, right?
Think about the core exchange. Someone sends money, someone else sends goods, often across long distances between strangers.
Okay.
The seller has an incentive, potentially, to take the money and send junk, or nothing at all, cheat.
Right.
The buyer has an incentive, potentially, to receive the perfectly good item and then claim it was broken or never arrived to try and get their money back.
Right.
Also, cheat.
So if both follow their rational self-interest to cheat.
No transactions happen. The whole marketplace collapses. The only thing that makes eBay or similar platforms work is trust, overcoming that dilemma so both parties feel safe enough to cooperate, make the exchange.
And that trust is under constant attack, you're saying, from two main directions.
Primarily two, yeah. First, there's seller fraud. This is the obvious stuff, selling counterfeit goods like fake iPads, pirated software, that kind of thing.
We hear about those scams.
But there's also a more subtle, structural kind of fraud aimed at manipulating the reputation system itself.
Like what?
The sources found examples like networks creating tons of fake transactions for something like, say, $100 iTunes gift cards, but selling them for $105.
Why would anyone pay more than face value?
They wouldn't if the goal was the gift card. The goal was the positive feedback. They were essentially buying reputation points through these phony inflated transactions. Build up a high feedback score quickly.
And then use that seemingly trustworthy account to pull off a much bigger scam later, selling high-value fake items or just disappearing with the money.
Exactly. Manufacturing trust illegitimately. So that's seller fraud. The other big threat is buyer extortion.
Buyer extortion, how does that work?
This is where a buyer receives an item, often perfectly fine, and then threatens the seller with negative feedback unless they get a partial or even a full refund. They might invent a tiny flaw or just make a baseless claim.
They're weaponizing the feedback system.
Precisely. They're leveraging the seller's fear of getting a negative mark on their reputation, which can really hurt future sales, to extract money after the sale.
And eBay tries to police this stuff, right? They cooperate with law enforcement, suspend accounts. I remember reading about some guy who got jail time for a huge hot tub scam.
That they do police it, and sometimes there are high-profile busts. But enforcement alone is like playing whack-a-mole. It's not enough to solve the underlying strategic problem.
Why not?
Because the scammers are adaptable. The sources mentioned you can go online and buy fully verified high-limit eBay accounts that were previously suspended, essentially, ready-made scam profiles for as little as $250.
Wow. So you shut one down, they just buy a new identity and pop right back up.
Pretty much. The policing helps, but the real vulnerability, especially for buyer extortion, was actually created by a policy change eBay itself made back in 2008.
What did they change?
They banned sellers from leaving negative or neutral feedback for buyers.
Why would they do that?
The intention was probably good to stop sellers from leaving retaliatory negative feedback if a buyer complained legitimately or left them a deserved negative. They wanted to encourage buyers to feel safe leaving honest feedback.
But the unintended consequence
Was that it completely disarmed the sellers against extortion. If a buyer threatened false negative feedback, the seller couldn't even leave a negative in return to warn other sellers about this problem buyer. They lost their main signaling and retaliation tool.
It created this total power imbalance where the buyer held all the cards in the feedback game.
Exactly. Think about that antique grandfather clock example from the sources. A buyer receives a valuable, fragile clock. They then claim some minor, maybe non-existent, damage and demand a huge partial refund, threatening negative feedback if the seller refuses. The seller knows they can't leave negative feedback in return, so they feel forced to pay the extortion money just to protect their precious reputation score.
Okay, that's a broken game. So how do you change this game to restore trust and fairness? You need to tackle both the extortion and the underlying fraud potential.
Right. For the extortion problem, the game changer is to neutralize the weapon, the threat of immediate negative feedback during the transaction.
How?
Implement a system of simultaneous feedback posting. It's sometimes called the Schwartz system, after an economist who proposed similar ideas.
Simultaneous posting, meaning?
Both the buyer and the seller write and submit their feedback within a certain window after the transaction. But, and here's the key, that feedback remains hidden from the other party. It only becomes visible and permanent on the site after the transaction is fully closed, say 60 days later, and both parties have submitted their feedback or the window closes.
Ah, okay. So if a buyer tries to extort a seller on day 10 by saying, give me your refund or I'll leave you negative feedback.
The threat is empty. The seller knows the buyer can't see their feedback yet, and the buyer can't change their own submitted feedback based on whether the seller caves or not. It removes the leverage point. The feedback becomes a final judgment after the fact, not a bargaining chip during the process.
That makes a lot of sense for stopping extortion. What about fighting the underlying seller fraud? The fake iPads, the manufactured reputation.
There, the challenge is reducing the information asymmetry that the buyer faces. They don't know if the seller is legit or if the product is real. We need a credible signal of quality.
Like a verification system.
Exactly. The proposal is something like extra assurance. Think about how the used car market evolved. You have Carfax reports, certified pre-owned programs from manufacturers.
Right, third-party validation.
Yes. eBay could facilitate or partner with reputable third parties to verify product information, authenticity, condition, especially for higher value or commonly counterfeited goods. This extra assurance certification acts like a stamp of quality.
And buyers would trust items with that certification more.
Presumably, yes.
Yeah.
It reduces their risk. Honest sellers benefit because they can get this certification and potentially charge a bit more for the assured quality. Fraudsters would find it much harder or impossible to get this legitimate certification. It introduces a reliable signal that cuts through the noise and helps buyers trust what they're buying.
Okay, our final file, File 6, takes us to arguably the highest stakes strategic battleground of all. The fight against antibiotic resistance. We're talking about superbugs, where our opponent, bacteria, is constantly evolving new defenses.
Yeah, this is a multi-front war, and the strategic failures are complex. We're fighting this game in our homes, in the pharmaceutical industry, and in our hospitals. Let's start at home with what the sources call the soap scam.
The soap scam. What's that about?
It's about antibacterial soap, the kind containing chemicals like triclosan. Studies show this stuff is now detectable in the urine of something like 75% of Americans.
Wow. So it's everywhere. Is it effective?
That's the scam part. There's no good evidence it provides any significant benefit over just washing your hands thoroughly with plain old soap and water. For the antibacterial agent to even work, it usually needs to sit on your skin for like 2 minutes.
Nobody washes their hands for 2 minutes straight.
Exactly. So it's ineffective for its claimed purpose. But worse, it actively contributes to antibiotic resistance by exposing bacteria to low levels of these agents constantly. And triclosan itself is classified as a pesticide and is an endocrine disruptor.
So consumers are paying extra for a product that doesn't work as advertised, might be harmful to them, and helped breed superbugs. That sounds like a terrible deal.
It is. But the strategic failure here isn't a prisoner's dilemma where people know they're making a bad choice. It's a game driven by misinformation.
People think they're doing something good, protecting their family.
Right. If consumers actually understood the risks and the lack of benefit, their rational choice, their dominant strategy, would be not to buy or use it.
So the game changer isn't necessarily banning it, but fixing the information gap.
Precisely. We need a credible signal. The sources suggest something like a safe biotic designation for cleaning products.
Like a USDA organic label for food.
Exactly like that. When consumers demanded organic milk free from certain hormones, the USDA eventually created that category and label. A safe biotic label could signal products that clean effectively without contributing to resistance or having other harmful effects. It uses market forces, driven by informed consumers, to incentivize companies to make better products.
Okay, that's the consumer front. What about the pharmaceutical labs? Developing new antibiotics is crucial, but it's notoriously unprofitable for drug companies, right?
It is. Antibiotics are usually taken for short periods, and doctors try to use the older, cheaper ones first to preserve the effectiveness of new ones. So a new antibiotic might not sell much initially, making a bad investment compared to, say, a chronic disease drug people take for life.
So how do you change the game to incentivize that vital innovation?
The U.S. government came up with a really clever strategic tool called the Eliminating Neglected Diseases, END Amendment. The key mechanism here is the Priority Review Voucher, or PRV.
A voucher, what does it do?
It's basically a transferable fast pass through the FDA approval process. If a company successfully develops a needed drug for a neglected disease, which can include things like treatments for tropical diseases, or crucially, novel antibiotics targeting resistant bacteria, they're awarded a PRV.
And what's that fast pass worth?
Potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. Here's why. A company might have a potential blockbuster drug, maybe a new cancer treatment or heart medication sitting in the pipeline, waiting for the standard 10 or 12-month FDA review. If they use their PRV on that blockbuster drug, they get bumped to the front of the line, getting an expedited review, maybe just 6 months. Hitting the market 6 months to a year earlier with a billion-dollar drug.
Is worth a fortune in extra sales before competitors catch up.
Exactly. So the PRV, earned by solving an unprofitable public health need, like a new antibiotic, can be applied to maximize profit on a completely different drug. It brilliantly channels the profit motive towards solving problems the market wouldn't normally prioritize. It uses market strategy to fix a market failure.
That's smart. Okay, so we have consumer signals and R&D incentives. What about the actual treatment and spread in hospitals? Doctors often prescribe antibiotics blindly at first, right?
Historically, yes, especially for things like tuberculosis. You'd start treatment with standard drugs, but the lab test to see if the specific strain was resistant could take weeks.
And during those weeks?
The resistant strain, if present, had a huge strategic advantage. It could multiply and spread while the ineffective drug was being used. The game-changer technology here is rapid diagnostics, specifically systems like GenExpert.
GenExpert, what does it do?
It's revolutionary. For TB, for example, the Expert MTBRF test can not only diagnose a disease, but also detect resistance to rifampin, a key first-line drug, all within about an hour, directly from a sputum sample.
1 hour instead of weeks.
Yes. That speed changes everything strategically. The doctor knows almost immediately if the standard drug will work or if they need to use second-line drugs.
So you hit the bacteria with the right weapon from day one?
Precisely. By targeting the treatment accurately and instantly, you eliminate that window where resistant strains have an advantage. You reduce the selective pressure favoring resistance. If used widely, this kind of rapid targeted treatment could potentially even help reverse resistance trends by making resistant strains less successful.
Wow. Okay, one last piece. Stopping the spread within hospitals, especially of really nasty bugs like CRE, carbapenem-resistant Enterobacteriaceae.
Right, these are some of the nightmare bacteria. The CDC developed a very strategic protocol for this, summarized as detect plus isolate plus search.
Detect, isolate, search. Break that down.
Okay, 1. Detect cases quickly when they appear in the hospital. Standard infection control. 2. Isolate the patients who have the resistant infection to prevent them from spreading it to others. Also standard. But the crucial game-changing third step is 3. Proactively search.
Search for what?
You don't just wait for people to get sick. You actively screen all patients who are considered at risk because they might have been exposed. Maybe they were on the same ward, transferred from another facility with an outbreak, etc. You test these epidemiologically linked patients, even if they show no symptoms.
Why is that proactive search so much more powerful than just isolating known cases?
Because isolation alone is never perfect. People move around, staff interact. The strategic genius of the search component is that it focuses the intervention pressure squarely on the resistant strains. By actively finding and isolating carriers of the resistant CRE, You're specifically disadvantaging that population of bacteria within the hospital ecosystem. Meanwhile, the normal susceptible strains of the same bacteria, the ones we can treat easily, are allowed to transmit relatively unhindered among patients who aren't isolated.
So you're making life hard for the resistant bugs while letting the treatable ones spread more easily.
Exactly. You're manipulating the transmission game.
Mhm.
By selectively suppressing the resistant strains through targeted search and isolation, you allow the susceptible strains to potentially outcompete them. Over time, the strategic pressure can cause the resistant population to dwindle relative to the susceptible one. It's like purposefully managing the microbial evolution within the hospital to favor the bugs we can beat.
So looking back across all 6 of these game-changer files, from online retailers coordinating prices to fishermen caught in a tragedy to the global fight against superbugs, what really jumps out is this common strategic thread, isn't it?
Absolutely. The problems seem incredibly different on the surface: pricing, ecology, real estate, healthcare, online trust, infectious disease, but the underlying game structures kept reappearing.
Yeah, we saw the prisoner's dilemma multiple times, the importance of timing, the critical role of information, who knows what, when, and the power of incentives, both good and bad.
And the key takeaway, the real power of game theory demonstrated here, isn't just about analyzing these problems. It's about achieving that game awareness, that ability to clearly see the strategic landscape, the players, their options, their incentives, the potential outcomes, and crucially, where the game's rules themselves are flawed.
Once you have that awareness, you gain the ability to not just play the game better, but to actually redesign it.
That's the ultimate goal, to move beyond just trying to win the games we encounter, and instead to actively change the rules, change the incentives, change the flow of information, to create better outcomes, whether it's for a business, for consumers, or for society as a whole. We're talking about transforming the entire ecosystem where these games are played.
It's a powerful shift in perspective. And maybe, as we wrap up, we can leave our listeners with a final thought on how this game awareness can be protective, even essential in their own lives. Think about strategic blind spots.
Yeah, like military commanders who get blindsided because they only prepare for the expected moves. The sources mention the classic Chinese strategist Sun Bin.
Right, against his rival Peng Wan.
Peng Wan was a competent commander, but Sun Bin defeated him decisively, twice, not because Peng was unskilled, but because Peng failed to imagine Sun Bin would radically change the game.
In that key battle, Peng Wan expected Sun Bin to rush off and defend an ally, Zhao, who was under attack. That was the standard, predictable move.
Right, but Sun Bin, possessing that deeper game awareness, knew Peng would expect that. So instead of defending the ally directly,
He attacked Peng Wan's own home base, the capital city of Wei.
which forced Peng Wan to abandon his siege and race back to defend his capital, falling right into the ambush Sun Bin had prepared. Peng couldn't conceive of that unconventional, game-changing move attacking the capital instead of the army, and his lack of foresight, his strategic blind spot, led to disaster.
It's a powerful analogy. Just like perhaps U.S. military planners might have been better prepared for the counterinsurgency in Iraq if they'd more fully game-planned unconventional responses. Cultivating your own game awareness can shield you personally.
Definitely. So the question to ponder is, how might developing your ability to see the hidden incentives, the information gaps, the timing issues, the underlying game structures in your own professional or personal life protect you? How can it help you avoid the strategic snares, as the source calls them, that others might set for you, either intentionally or just through systemic flaws?
Something to think about. How can seeing the game save you from becoming an unwitting pawn in it? We'll leave you with that thought until the next time we dive deep.